couple of little jobs on the Kove today. First thing I want to do is, you may have noticed in some other videos, after the weather's been very hot, particularly because where I keep it, the garage gets very warm when it's sunny, and obviously these graphics are black so they absorb a lot of heat, and it seems that when the tanks expand slightly and then contract again, it causes all of these graphics to really bubble up. Now you can smooth them out pretty easily, just with like one of these and a little bit of heat, but really it should look nice and smooth like they do at the front. Now it's all a bit experimental, but Ryan at Sticker Garage UK has kindly sent me through a graphic for the front right hand side of the tank, which has got these perforations in them, so I'm going to try fitting that and then we shall see if it makes much difference. Other things I want to do today: the rear brake is getting a little bit spongy. It's been through a lot of water, had a very wet winter, things like Great Christmas Escape and a lot of wet trail riding. Front brake's not as bad, but maybe a little bit spongy, so I'm just gonna bleed the brakes as well. But the other thing I'm going to try is, there's been a couple of videos going around about a way of making the throttle response a lot less on-off and a lot more smooth, and that involves basically unplugging what is effectively the idle air control, electronic idle air control valve, which is somewhere on the throttle body, which people say you can get to behind here without removing the tank, but I might just loosen the tank a little bit just to get proper access, because I also, if I am taking it apart, I want to cover up those plugs and protect them so they don't get full of dirt and grime and moisture and all that stuff. So that is the plan for the day. Okay, so got this new piece of the decals on. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. It seems to fit okay. I got some of the bigger bubbles out of the other bit, so it's a bit smoother. So now I'm going to move on to bleeding the brakes. So that's fairly straightforward. Like, all you need to do is make sure you get enough access to take the cap off of the brake fluid reservoir. So to do that, you take out this bolt here, you do the same on the other side, then you just loosen these two top ones and you can start to swivel it up. If you want to swivel it all the way up, you've got to take off the OBD 2 port, but because I only need a little bit of clearance, I just left that there, and then I've just got it propped up with this stick on the back wheel. Obviously you have to remove the silencer from the bracket in order for it to flip up like that. So I've topped up the reservoir with .4 brake fluid, and then I've got my vacuum brake bleeding stuff hooked up. So you've got this pipe that goes onto the bleed nipple, got a little 8mm spanner on there. So the idea is you just build up a bit of vacuum on here, and then you just crack open this bleed nipple a touch. So you see the fluid start to come out. We'll see if there's any air comes out with it. Quite a bit of air actually. As you can see, this fluid is very mucky, and now it's bled, this is nice and firm. You can't actually push it by hand to the end of its travel, so I'm hoping that's going to feel a little bit more sharp when riding along. Let's put all this back together. First you want to put this diaphragm in, it will slop a bit of fluid out. It's just to make sure there's no air or moisture trapped in there, so put a cloth to catch it or a little bucket, what have you. And then put this little Mickey Mouse shaped cover that's got the plastic insert in it over as well. Sort of pops on there. Then these two tiny little 7mm bolts, which are probably going to take two hands, so I'll just get them started and I'll nip them back up. Okay, so now I've moved on to the front brakes. Did this using a similar method but slightly simpler really. Just basically using the lever to propel the new fluid down into the system. So you can see topped up the reservoir with some nice clean fluids. That's the colour it should be, sort of golden brown. On the bleed nipple, I actually dug out a great Wiimoto tool from, I've probably had it for 20 years, called the little bleeder. So it's just a one-way valve. You can see it's got a arrow on it somewhere, there you go. It shows it lets stuff through that way but not back through that way. So just attach this tube to it, cracked open the bleed nipple, and then pump the brake until the fluid came through nice and clear and without any air bubbles, and then caught all of the liquid in this handy dandy container, and then pumped it until the lever gives a nice firm feel. So like before it felt a little bit spongy and you could pull it all the way back to the handlebar. Now that's got a nice positive action to it, and you can see you can really squeeze it, and that's the maximum travel, so there's no air left in the system to compress. So this is now at the right level, so much like before, just need to put the little thing to get the air out. And I guess watch out where you're spilling that, because it's not very good for anything. But we're going to clean it off in a second anyway. Pop that lid back on, and rather than bolts, there's little retaining screws. It's actually, I probably will grease at some point, just because the number of times on old bikes I've had to drill the heads off one of these because they're just fully rust welded in place. So let's do this up. So yeah, like I guess the trick is to not over tighten them. And just again brake cleaner. Anywhere brake fluid has been, just give it a little clean off. Good test of the decals, get some brake fluid on them and brake cleaner, just to make sure they definitely stick. And that's it really. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do today, or have done today, is try unplugging the idle air control solenoid valve thing, which I've done already. You can see up here, this blue plug plugs into this connector here. It's actually very close to where I've run the quick shift wire down, but all you've got to do is just get a finger on top of it and pull downwards and this blue plug comes out. I've just taken the tank partially off, just so I get camera in there so you can have a look at it. But if you wanted to experiment, if you've got long enough fingers, you could probably just get a finger in there without taking the tank off at all. So clearly it's covered in mud, so it is in an area where I need to protect that plug if I want to be able to plug it back in again. So I might just leave it as it is for now, just to test it out. But then if I want to keep it like that, I will get something to kind of cover the ends of the connectors so they don't get full of mud and water and condensation and road salt and all that stuff. But supposedly that makes the throttle a lot smoother. But first thing to check is, does it actually still start? So yes, it did start, but it did need a tiny bit of throttle just to get going. I'll try it with no throttle at all again. Yeah, that's fine. I'll try it with a little bit of throttle. I mean, it's very hard to tell, but that does feel like it's pretty smooth. and seems to start up no problem at all. Probably just need a little bit of, just crack the throttle open a tiny bit just to give it that little bit of extra air, which is, I imagine, what the solenoid is doing anyway. So yeah, let's experiment with that. Right, well, the maiden voyage after yesterday's tinkering, just off to Rykas Café in Box Hill, meet up with a couple of other bike folks. Got Mr. Oz Adventures is over from Australia. The event itself, I think, has been organised by Hippo Drones. It's got quite the story of his biking at the moment, having recently had a heart attack whilst out trail riding and then stubbornly ridden himself home and taken himself to hospital and lived to tell the tale, which is pretty awesome. I think a few other people are going to be around as well. There's Big Pezza, who I know when he was doing the Grand Challenge, watched quite a few of his videos, always a good laugh. So looking forward to meeting some of these people in the flesh. So pleased to report, it's a beautiful day, and yesterday's tinkering seems to have been pretty worthwhile. The brakes are way sharper now, especially the rear. That was where the really gungy green brake fluid came pouring out of. So that was, despite theoretically being under a year old, water must have got very much into the, either there was some kind of liquid, some water, some condensation in the actual system as it was plumbed in brand new on the bike, or it sucked up some water maybe during the winter on Salisbury Plain where we were going through a lot of very deep puddles. But either way, with the ABS off, you can lock up the rear very easily now, so that's going to be much better for downhill control and probably wheelie control. I'm very pleased to say the little mod of unplugging that idle air control valve solenoid thing that people have said smoothens out the jerky sort of on-off throttle, especially at kind of cruising speed in urban areas, so like sort of 30 and 40 mile an hour zones when you're in third or fourth. It also doesn't, you realise there's a slight bog from zero throttle that I think I just naturally adapted to, because when setting off from some lights or what have you, you'd give it a little bit more throttle and then let the clutch out just to avoid that bog, so you kind of set off with a bit more vigour, but you don't need to so much anymore. Like before, the revs would be sort of bouncing around at 30 miles an hour-ish. You get that sort of back-forward jerking motion, but that all seems to be gone now, which is fantastic. So because I'm perennially behind schedule, I'm going to be going the quick way to the meet and then the scenic route back. It's a lovely sunny day, so it will also give me a bit of an opportunity to try the, well, experience the kind of idle air control mod on a sort of motorway environment, because even at cruising speed it had a little bit of kind of jerkiness at sort of constant throttle, so it'll be interesting to see what that does. I do need to be careful though, because on the way back from Bugtown the other week I did manage to get a speeding ticket. So yeah, I got my very first speeding ticket on a motorbike in just about 25 years of riding, on the way back from Bugtown. Caught by a mobile speed camera unit thing doing 47 in a 40, so which of course meant that I was able to do a not another car around for miles. And I believe, looking at the photos, the camera car itself was hiding behind some tall grass, because in the 5 photos they took, you could barely see it was me. You could definitely not see the number plate because tall grass was obscuring the lens. It's only the last shot that you can see the bike. So they measured the speed basically by pointing it at my helmet, I guess, and then they took the photo and the gap between the grass. Like, it's all just a video and they just take snapshots, frames out of that little video. But fortunately, all's well that ends well. Learnt my lesson. Make sure to keep speed down in posted limits and keep a good eye out for people in suspicious looking vans. And no harm done, because still no points on my licence. You can actually tell that the engine is running much more smoothly at lower revs with the idle air control valve solenoid unplugged, because I was just cruising up that last bit of road at 40 and it felt a little bit chuggy. Then I noticed I was in 6th gear. I would never have been riding in 6th gear normally at that kind of velocity. I think it's a good mod. I guess it may be the effect of it, because it controls the idle, as well as, I imagine, something to do with emissions at low RPMs. Might mean that if I suddenly changed elevation, like took the bike to the Himalayas, it might have some trouble starting, or something like that, but I think for my purposes, I'll probably just leave it unplugged. I might find a better solution to waterproofing the connectors, to make sure that I can plug them in again if I need to. And then it might also be worth occasionally plugging it in just to make sure the solenoid doesn't seize up or what have you. But a lot of Sunday drivers around today. Filtering through this little traffic jam, the lack of jerkiness and the sort of steady, constant, relatively low amounts of throttle does make it a lot easier to filter, because before I would be pulling in the clutch just to smooth out the jerk at sort of low RPM. Let's just negotiate this bit. We don't need to be waiting on all of this. Definitely a good mod all round.
A few moments later.
Right, so this is interesting. After quite a significant motorway run, when I got back onto the slower speed roads, I found opening the throttle from low RPM, actually it was quite hesitant. There's quite a lot of juddering, almost more so than before unplugging the thing. So I wonder if the idle air control valve does help smooth out some things when the ECU is sort of switching between throwing all the fuel in it for cruising along the motorway versus sipping fuel for slower roads. I wonder if it will kind of revert back to normal once. Down a bit. Also, there was quite a lot of backfiring going on, which suggests the fuel maybe not quite right. The fuel air mixture not quite right. See now, at 40 and 5th, it does feel like that little back and forth that you're getting with the valve plugged in. It sort of smooths out quicker. out for me. Anyway, nearly there. It's like a spot I know. Right, well that was very nice to meet everyone, go for a little bit of a drink and a snack and stuff. Now for a little ride home. Now interestingly, after the bike's cooled down again, after a bit of a rest at the cafe, the smoothness is back. So maybe the idle air control does something when the bike is warmer. Either that or the current combination of ECU, quick shifter, and this thing being unplugged is just too much. Actually, you can now see it sort of coughing and spluttering a little bit here as well. Almost probably worse than it was when it was plugged in, to be honest. Sorry, I might try plugging back in the idle air control solenoid and see what that does to this. You can see there, really low RPM, that's not a like low RPM constant throttle. It's alright from like sort of here up. But for very low RPM it's almost more juddery than it was before. Twists and turns, but it's now a 40-mile-an-hour average speed check zone, so safety first. Interestingly, here is the section where in a previous video I was talking about how smooth the Kove ECU was making the bike. I honestly think it was smoother than it is now, so I think I'm going to plug that plug back in and see what it does. No trip it's quite right without a venture down a byway somewhere. So let's get out this little one. There's no puddles here at the moment. Definitely don't need the numbly tyres. Cheers. Thank you. You ever know what's around the next corner? This tree's got lower, ducked out. Okay, so I've been home, I've plugged the idle air control solenoid thing back in. When I first plugged it in, obviously the engine was hot, but it took quite a while to start actually. It felt like it took a minute to reset itself, get in whatever position it needed to, or it was trying to do the wrong thing. I don't know exactly what was going on, but obviously it did start eventually. Now I just got to try and recreate some of the conditions. I actually think this kind of combination of the Kove, this exhaust, it kind of dialed out a lot of the jerkiness anyway. I can sort of feel a little bit, probably isn't even perceptible on the camera, but just trying to hold it at like 4,000 RPM, it does sort of cup and splutter a little bit, but nothing like. So if we go all the way around this roundabout, it was really struggling to hold like a constant throttle with the solenoid unplugged, so that immediately feels like it's better. So it feels like, so this is the, you can even see the little blue line moving around. So it is a little bit juddery, but compared to what it felt like just riding back with it unplugged, because that felt like something was seriously unhappy with in terms of the balance of, I guess, fuel and air and ignition. Whilst unplugging it is a useful mod for some people, it's not going to be for me.